Okay. Get your attention. Okay, so I did my project on the reality of Puerto Rican statehood and the process of Puerto Rican independence. As for a brief intro and roadmap, I will be going over how Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory, go over the current status and its issues, and I'll go over the current crisis in Puerto Rico, and I'll also go over the different groups and their proposals to solve the Puerto Rican territorial crisis. Now, the invasion. As shown in the historical account in This Day in History, July 25, 1898, Puerto Rico was invaded in 1898, July 25, in the midst of the Spanish-American War. Ironically, the Americans actually wanted to take over Cuba and not Puerto Rico. At the end, they would take over both of them. Now, the Commonwealth and the current status. The Commonwealth of Puerto Rico is the current status of Puerto Rico. It is supported by 40 to 45% of the population and the PPD party, the People's Democratic Party, in the island. And this party started in the 40s with the leadership of Luis Muñoz Marin. Luis Muñoz Marin would eventually become Puerto Rico's first democratically elected governor in 48, and in 52 the Commonwealth status would take place, and he would govern till 68. The Commonwealth status would give rise to Hacienda, which is Puerto Rico's own IRS. Now under the new status, Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican people could decide taxes independently from the United States. It also withheld the Jones Act that gave Puerto Ricans U.S. citizenship and introduced the AEE and the AAA, which are the island's power and electricity, publicly owned power and electricity companies. Now, the problems with the Commonwealth and the Jones Act come with, number one, the U.S. as listed in the book War Against All Puerto Ricans by Nestle A. Dennis in the Jones Act 1917 as follows: the Congress can ignore any Puerto Rican's Bill of Rights. Example, Sanchez Valles versus the Supreme Court, where it was about the Fifth Amendment, and Sanchez Valles being tried in Puerto Rico and then the federal court, and then the Supreme Court said since Puerto Ricans are citizens through the Jones Act, they don't have right to the Fifth Amendment. Now, it could override any laws passed by Puerto Rican legislature. The resident commissioner has no vote in the U.S. Congress, and the U.S. citizenship of Puerto Ricans has been used to draft Puerto Rican men into the war. As example, my grandfather was drafted into Vietnam. Now, in the Puerto Rican debt crisis. The Puerto Rican debt crisis has to do with bad administrations and also with its constitutions. The Constitution says that Puerto Rico cannot amass debt it cannot repay, and that it must repay national debt before anything else. But then came in municipal bonds and the governorship of Pedro Rosselló. Pedro Rosselló was the second pro-statehood governor of Puerto Rico. And through supposed extra constitutional debt, he racked up debt that was essentially unpayable, and so did the preceding governments. But then the bondholders in New York said that the debt was actually constitutional debt, and this forced Puerto Rico to be put under a financial control board where the federal government now controls its finance so that it pays back the debt. And now this is a graph of how the debt has stacked up. Pedro Rosselló began with this, and then all the subsequent governors kept on adding more and more debt. Even though, for example, Luis Muñoz Marin was for 20 years and he didn't have any of these. Now, on the 51st day, I was reading by Efrain Nieves, journalist on the Banco Latino Journal and Historical Account. The beginning of the statehood movement began with José Celso Barbosa, the founder of the Puerto Rican Republican Party, and he's held as an important figure in Puerto Rican history by those who support Puerto Rican statehood. Now, the argument: statehood is believed that because Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, they have an inherent right to statehood. But the problem with this is that Puerto Ricans aren't really U.S. citizens, as they're U.S. citizens through the Jones Act and not the Constitution. Then another issue: the USA doesn't regard the Constitution doesn't regard statehood as a right, but rather as a concession. As mentioned, Article 4, Section 3, the new states shall be passed through the Congress of this nation, meaning without the approval of Congress, Puerto Rico cannot become a state. Also, one of the arguments by stateholders is that federal funding essentially would solve Puerto Rico's crisis, that through the extra federal funding that Puerto Rico would receive as a state, it would solve its problems. And Puerto Rico was also put as an unincorporated territory when it was invaded as to with the intentions of it not becoming a state. Also, interest of statehood in Puerto Rico. The statehood movement is roughly 45 to 50% of the people and is spearheaded by the PNP, the New Progressive Party, who advocates for Puerto Rican statehood. The movement of Puerto Rican statehood, even though it's big, it has still failed to amass a majority of Puerto Rican voters. Now, interest of statehood in the USA, as written in El Nuevo Dia newspaper, I will quote Raúl Labrador, who said, "I didn't come to Congress to solve Puerto Rico's problems." Essentially, what this means is that the congressmen and congresswomen in the United States are going to put their constituencies over the Puerto Rican people. So they're really going to see Puerto Rican statehood as a secondary issue and not a primary issue. Also, we don't know anything about what Donald Trump was to do in terms of the Puerto Rican status, and that can be a problem. Now, on the matter of independence, the independence movement began in 1860 on September 23rd with the El Grito de Lares rebellion in Lares, Puerto Rico, led by Ramon Emeterio Betances. And now there would also be another rebellion in the 1950s by Don Pedro Albizu Campo and the Puerto Rican nationalists against the colonial authorities in the island after the repression of the Puerto Rican independence movement. And this was quoted from War Against All Puerto Ricans by Delson Inez, 2015. Independence, the argument. The argument of independence is that Puerto Ricans were essentially forced into this colonial situation, meaning that they're being denied an inalienable right to independence, and that Puerto Ricans see themselves as a nation. As Puerto Ricans seeing themselves as a nation would need problems to statehood, since Puerto Ricans would see themselves as Puerto Rican first and American second. And now, independence. Another argument is the national courts. The United Nations Charter 1514 says that all peoples in all colonies have the right to govern themselves. This essentially gives the independence movement some solid ground to stand on. But then there's problems. As written by the 80 Grados newspaper on their article of the Puerto Rican independence statistics, the support for Puerto Rican independence is between 6 to 9%. The biggest segment of the movement is spearheaded by the PIP, the Puerto Rican Independence Party. And here's their flag and logo. And now the problem is that the PIP is the largest segment, but it does not compromise a majority of the movement, as the Puerto Rican independence movement tends to suffer from factionalism within the movement. And now, interest of independence in the USA. As written in the Libcom Journal, interest of independence in the USA is concentrated in Puerto Rican communities, as shown by the founding of the Young Lords in 1969 in East Harlem, New York. As a pro-independence, Puerto Ricans founded this group to defend Puerto Rican communities and advocate for decolonization of the island. And now you also have an official Puerto Rican Independence Party committee in New York where 2 million Puerto Ricans now reside. Now, interest of independence in the United States. Congressman Luis Gutierrez is a New Yorican who is an avid supporter of Puerto Rican independence and has been very vocal on the issues of Puerto Rican status and Puerto Rican decolonization and the issues that plague Puerto Rico. And he has shown his support. And he is a congressman in the 4th District of Illinois. And now, as for a conclusion, I have gone over how Puerto Rico became a U.S. territory, the current status and its issues. I've gone over the statehood and independence and their pros and cons, and I went over the interest of both options, both in the United States and Puerto Rico. And here's my bibliography, and I thank the audience for listening to my speech.